The moment I saw the uniform, I knew it wasn't a real cop, and I knew exactly why he was there. I didn't reach for my purse. I reached for my phone. One tap on the back camera. Audio rolling, angle facing the door, just enough to catch the steps, the porch, and every word that was about to be said. The knock came again, 2 sharp taps, rehearsed to sound like authority. I waited. Real law enforcement doesn't knock twice in 20 seconds. Real cops announce themselves. This one? He stood silent, shoulders squared, right hand resting near his belt like he thought the badge gave him permission to intimidate. I opened the door slowly, stood in the frame. He gave me the smile. The one bureaucrats wear when they think they've already won. "Ma'am, we've received a noise complaint from a neighbor," he said, tapping a clipboard. "I need to ask you a few questions." I glanced at the logo on his sleeve. Arbor Hills Community Safety Liaison. Not police, not sheriff. Just another HOA rent-a-badge playing cop on private time. I didn't flinch. I just asked, "Is this visit being recorded?" Because mine already was. He shifted slightly, the clipboard rising like a prop in a bad play. "I'm going to need you to step outside, ma'am. HOA Regulation 4.6 authorizes community officers to conduct verbal checks. In person." I didn't move. I just angled the door with my foot. Not shut, not open. Controlled. "You'll need to cite the exact language on that," I said. Because HOA Bylaw 4.6 doesn't grant authority for door-to-door questioning. It refers to pre-approved inspections with written notice 72 hours in advance. He blinked. Just once. I kept going, voice even. "Also, for record purposes, could you state your full name, badge number, and the nature of the complaint?" He cleared his throat. "We've received multiple reports of disruptive noise coming from this property between 9 and 11 p.m. Specifically, yelling. That almost made me laugh. I live alone," I replied. "I don't host parties, I don't own a stereo. And the last time I raised my voice was 3 deployments ago." He frowned. "You're denying the noise occurred?" "I'm denying the story," I said calmly. "The noise? I believe that happened. But it didn't come from this house." I let the silence linger just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I stepped aside, just enough for him to see the hallway behind me. Spotless, empty, quiet. No music, no clutter, nothing. "You're welcome to request a warrant if you'd like to inspect," I added. "Otherwise, I suggest you forward the complaint to your legal counsel, along with this recording." He looked down, saw the phone still running in my hand, the light blinking. That's when the hesitation set in. I could see it. The recalculation. The flicker of realization that this wasn't going to go how it usually did. Most people in this neighborhood opened the door apologizing. Most begged for forgiveness for things they didn't do. Most didn't know that private HOA patrols have no right to detain or interrogate. But I wasn't most people. I had been in military law for 11 years. I'd cross-examined corrupt officers, deconstructed cover-ups, and once got an entire deployment. Rotation nullified on procedural grounds. I didn't just know the law, I taught it. When my husband died in Kabul, caught in the blast radius of a convoy reroute that never should have happened, I left active duty, but not the fight. I relocated here to a quiet suburb for peace, for space, for the kind of silence that doesn't come with body bags or sandbags, and now someone had weaponized that silence against me. "You said multiple reports," I said finally. "Can you name the complainants?" He shook his head quickly. "That information is confidential." Not under Section 5.2 of Arbor Hills HOA policy. Residents have a right to know the origin of complaints used to justify formal citations, unless the report was anonymous, in which case, this visit violates due process. He looked down again, not at the clipboard this time, at his shoes. That was when I knew he didn't expect to be challenged. I had been in military law for 11 years. I'd cross-examined corrupt officers, deconstructed cover-ups, and once got an entire deployment rotation nullified on procedural grounds. I didn't just know the law, I taught it. When my husband died in Kabul, caught in the blast radius of a convoy reroute that never should have happened, I left active duty, but not the fight. I relocated here, to a quiet suburb, for peace, for space, for the kind of silence that doesn't come with body bags or sandbags. He adjusted the clipboard again, more nervous this time. I could see the paper shake slightly. Not much. Just enough to confirm he'd realized he'd walked into the wrong house with the wrong script. "I'm just here to collect information," he said, hedging now. "The board asked me to follow up on possible violations." "Then why are you wearing a badge?" I cut in, cool and quiet. He looked down instinctively, and that's when I saw it. The badge was metal, triangular, with a raised emblem that mimicked a sheriff's star. The words "Community Enforcement" were engraved across the top. Below it, "Region 14, Zone 6. No state seal, no serial number. Just a prop dressed up in authority. May I?" I asked, already pulling my phone closer to record the detail. It's standard issue," he said quickly, backing a half step away from the door. "Standard issue from whom?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. I leaned slightly forward. "You know impersonating a peace officer is a felony in this state, right?" He blanched. "Now maybe you're just misinformed," I added, letting him squirm. "Maybe someone gave you a badge and told you it meant something. But I'm going to give you a chance right now to either step back and reconsider your script, or we escalate." He glanced over his shoulder. "Nobody there to save him." "Let me be very clear," I continued. "You are standing on private property, outside a veteran's residence, citing a complaint that doesn't exist in any documented HOA report I've received. That means either the board sent you without legal basis, or someone is using your badge to run personal errands." His throat worked to swallow. I'm just doing my job." "Then get a real one," I said calmly. "Because whatever you think this is, it ends here." He looked like he wanted to say something else. Maybe a defense, maybe a threat. But instead, he did the smartest thing he'd done all morning. He turned and walked off the porch. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The camera had everything. He walked away. I caught the small detail I'd missed before, the earpiece in his right ear. Not police issue, retail, connected to a phone clipped at his hip with a cracked screen. Who was listening on the other end? HOA president? A neighbor with too much time and not enough ethics? Didn't matter. They just exposed themselves. I closed the door without slamming it. No drama, no outburst. Just the soft click of steel meeting the frame, the sound of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to be dangerous. I turned the phone over in my hand, double-checked that the footage had saved, and then uploaded it to a secure drive. Time-stamped and geotagged. Let them try to claim it didn't happen. Let them try to scrub the evidence later. I'd handled cartel surveillance sweeps in Honduras with less preparation. And this? This was just suburbia in khakis, which made it even more dangerous. These people didn't use guns. They used gossip, bylaws, and paperwork. Weaponized bureaucracy delivered with polite smiles, and I was done playing polite. I went to my desk, opened a folder labeled HOA, Initial Incidents, and added a fresh entry. April 3rd, unauthorized pseudo-enforcement visit. Badge lacked serial. ID, attempted unlawful questioning. Refused to name complainants. Left under verbal pressure. Attached, 1 video file, 1 audio backup. That made 5 entries in 6 weeks. Harassment, coordinated. Escalating. They thought they were poking at a passive target. A widow with a quiet house and no allies. What they didn't know, what they never calculate for, is what happens when the person you provoke used to prosecute war crimes. A soft sound pulled me from the computer, the rustle of wind outside, and then the sharp click of a phone. Camera. I turned slowly and looked out the window. There she was, My neighbor, Rachel Chen. Board member, morning jogger, evening wine sipper. Currently standing on the sidewalk across the street, pointing her phone at my door, recording. When she saw me watching, she smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then turned and walked away like it was just another fitness stroll. Except now I had her face on my own camera, too. 2 recordings in a day, 2 badges of proof, and one very clear message. They weren't just watching. They were building a case, but so was I. And I had something they didn't. Training. Opened a drawer and pulled out a legal pad. At the top, in thick black ink, I wrote one sentence. Every paper weapon has a signature. I'm going to find yours. Then I circled it. Hard. The HOA thought they were documenting a problem. They didn't realize the investigation had already begun, and they were the ones under audit. He didn't know it yet, but the second he stepped on my porch, he'd just triggered a full investigation. And I wasn't going to stop until someone lost their badge. On the 7th business day, 2 days past the HOA's own deadline, I received a manila envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Inside, a printed spreadsheet titled Resident Complaint Log, Jan Apper, with a half-smudged Arbor Hills letterhead. There were 15 entries total. My name appeared 3 times, but none of them matched the date of the noise violation used to justify the officer's visit. Not a single report filed on April 3rd. I checked again. Every entry had a date, a complainant's name or ID number, and a short reason. Unlicensed holiday lights, garage door left open overnight, trash visible on a non-collection day, nothing about noise, nothing about yelling, nothing about me. I flipped the page over. That's where I found it, a forwarded email, unformatted and raw. From RichinoArborHoa.org to boardgroupwarborhoa.org. Date, April 2nd, 9:22 p.m. Subject, noise issue, 78, Wallace Doctor. Heard loud shouting again tonight coming from 78. This has happened more than once. We really need to do something about this. Should we send someone? There it was. No formal complaint, no investigation, no signature from a second board member, just an informal email sent by Rachel Chen, 1 day before the security officer appeared on my porch pretending to be law enforcement. She didn't even bother with a citation form. I took a deep breath. Not rage, just recognition. They'd sent a man to my door based on hearsay, and they'd dressed him up like a cop. I went back to the HOA charter, Rachel Chen, Architectural Committee Chair. Not disciplinary, not authorized for enforcement. Her duties were limited to color swatches and mailbox sizes, and yet she'd triggered a private security response without a vote, without notice, and without process. That wasn't oversight. That was abuse of power. I pulled the HOA's last 3 annual disclosures and scanned for vendor contracts. No mention of a community safety liaison, no budget lines for patrol services, no liability rider, no background check documentation, nothing. Then, I checked the county contractor database, ran the officer's badge number as a registered ID. Nothing. So I took a different route. I isolated a frame from the doorbell footage, clear enough to read the last 4 digits on his ID, the 2609. Then I ran a public business license search. Result, expired private security registration. Owner, Martin D. Carver, no active employment, a defunct business tied to a P.O. box in Westfield. 2 towns over, he wasn't on the HOA payroll, he wasn't bonded. He wasn't authorized to enforce anything. Rachel had hired a freelance enforcer, off books, probably paid cash. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the printout. It had been a bluff. The badge, the clipboard, the phrasing. A small-town theater. Performance designed to scare someone who didn't know the rules. Except I did. And now, I had receipts. The name Rachel Chen kept showing up in the wrong places. Violation logs. Internal emails. And now, budget allocations. I requested the past 12 months of HOA expense reports. They sent over the public version, sanitized one-page summaries with vague line items like beautification projects and security. Initiative, Q1. But that wasn't the full ledger. I didn't need it. I had something better. County records. All HOA contracts had to be registered for tax and zoning purposes, even if they weren't publicly disclosed to residents. Took me an hour to find it. A landscaping contract awarded last fall. Vendor, West Ridge Landscaping. No open bid, no community notice. I checked the contractor license. Owner, Gregory Chendart Rachel's husband. A second contract, dated just 2 months later, for maintenance. And seasonal upgrades, also awarded to West Ridge. Combined total, $48,000, no vote, no email to homeowners, no competitive bids, just Rachel signing off on contracts that paid her husband's company. Twice. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. I dug deeper. In the HOA's expense approvals, I found 2 handwritten reimbursement memos. Unusual in a system that was supposed to use electronic sign-off. Both were labeled security discretionary. Both were signed by Rachel Chen and another board member, Terry Alston. I recognized Terry's name. He'd never appeared at community meetings, voted by proxy, always aligned with Rachel. A ghost with a vote, the reimbursements totaled $3,000. One of them had a receipt attached from an office supply store. The other was cash withdrawn from a neighborhood credit union. That alone wasn't proof of misuse. But then I checked the timeline. One reimbursement occurred the same week that the fake security officer visited my home. Another occurred the week the board announced their Community Safety Liaison initiative, buried in a bullet point at the bottom of a newsletter with no agenda, no minutes, no vote record. That was a violation of open meeting law, both state and HOA specific. Any new program, especially one involving budget, security, or enforcement, required public notice at least 72 hours in advance. Agenda transparency. Board vote during an open session. None of that had happened. I pulled up the board's calendar from the HOA website. No meetings listed between February 2nd and April 14th, and yet the security program launched March 29th, the same day Rachel sent her noise complaint email. I was starting to see the full picture. Rachel films me on her morning walk. She sends a vague email about noise. A private security officer, hired off books, shows up the next day. HOA finances show quiet payouts under security discretionary. Her husband's company benefits from silent landscaping contracts. They weren't enforcing rules, they were enforcing silence. Using the HOA like a personal fiefdom, bullying anyone who didn't play along or stay quiet. I stared at the contracts again and wrote 2 words in my legal pad. Self-dealing, collusion. They'd hidden the corruption under beautification and safety. I was going to rip the facade off, brick by brick. It happened quietly, like most real turning points do. No speeches. No flags waving, just a folded envelope slipped into my mailbox, with no return name. No stamp. Just the initials WB, scribbled in firm handwriting. I waited until I was inside, curtains drawn, the dogs settled. Then I opened it. Inside was a typed note. Short. Careful. I've watched them do this before. You're not the first, but maybe you'll be the last. Thought this might help. Bennett, Lot 42. Beneath the note were 2 photocopied pages, old HOA board minutes from 2021. Highlighted in yellow were 3 items. A denied complaint from W. Bennett regarding improper board vote on contractor selection. A citation issued to his wife for unauthorized flagpole height. 1 week later, a closed-door session marked simply, disciplinary review, no recording available. Didn't know much about Mr. Bennett. He lived on the corner near the retention pond. Drove an aging Buick. Walked with a slow, deliberate gait. Always nodded when I passed, never spoke. But now I understood the look in his eyes, the caution, the wait. They'd gone after his family, too. The next morning, I waited until his daily routine brought him outside. He was watering the azaleas by hand, no sprinkler system. I approached slowly, Coda on a leash, Apollo trailing. "Mr. Bennett?" I said softly. He didn't look startled, just turned and met my eyes. "You left me something." He gave a slow nod. "Figured you'd know what to do with it." "I'm trying," I said. "But I think this is bigger than citations and clipboard. Cowboys." "It always is," he replied. "Control's never about rules. It's about silence." He looked down at the dog sitting obediently beside me. "She's beautiful," he said, reaching out gently. Coda didn't flinch, just leaned into the touch. "My wife loved dogs," he said. "Used to sit out here with hours every evening. We'd talk about nothing. That was peace, you know?" I nodded. "After she got sick, I installed a pole to hang her unit's flag. Thought maybe it'd give her something to look at. Something proud." He paused. "They made her take it down. Said it wasn't in harmony with the community elevation profile." She cried. First time I'd seen her do that since her diagnosis. I didn't interrupt. "When I filed a complaint," he continued, "Rachel and Terry called an emergency session. Said I was disrupting board unity. Next thing I knew, we had weekly inspections. Grass too long. Trash bins too visible. 1 month they fined me $600. That's what retirement dignity costs, apparently." He shook his head, then looked at me. Not angry, not bitter. Just tired. "I didn't fight back," he said. "Didn't know how, but you do." "I do," I said, "and I won't stop." He smiled, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes but means everything anyway. "There's more where that came from," he said. "Old meeting packets, budget breakdowns. I kept copies, just in case." "In case of what?" "In case someone like you moved in." As I walked back home with the dogs, the wind picked up slightly. Not enough to be dramatic. Just enough to move the leaves on the Bennett porch. Just enough to tug gently at the folded flag on the shelf by the window. And I knew. This wasn't just about legal retaliation anymore. This was about dignity, for everyone they'd silenced. At 2:13 a.m., my security feed cut out. Just one camera, the side yard. The motion alert buzzed, then went dark. No trigger, no reason. At first, I thought it was a glitch, a cable failure. But when I checked the hardware the next morning, the lens had been sprayed with something cloudy and acidic, not shattered, just enough to distort the image. Controlled damage. I made a note in the log, entry, bar 11. Camera lens compromised. No alert sound. No intrusion recorded. Intentional disabling suspected. Then I walked out to the driveway, and there it was, one of my garbage bags, slashed wide open, contents scattered, coffee grounds, empty meal trays, shredded packaging, all dumped and splayed across the concrete, like a crime scene. Coda let out a low grumble from behind the screen door. He never growled at trash. I scanned the area. No paw prints, no tire marks. Just a single broken plastic zip tie resting near the mess, the kind used to hold garbage bin lids shut. Only I didn't use zip ties. Whoever did this had opened the bin, taken out a single bag, cut it, and then placed the rest neatly back. Inside. Calculated. Not vandalism. A message. I went back inside and checked the live feeds. Everything else looked normal, but now I didn't trust it. I reviewed the backup archive on the external drive and tried scrubbing through the night. That's when I noticed it. The gap footage jumped from 2:12:59 to 2:15:08. Exactly 2 minutes and 9 seconds missing. Not a tech issue. Not a glitch. Manual deletion. Someone had gotten past the system, or jammed it. Either way, it was no longer harassment. It was infiltration. I printed the clip log and added it to the file. Then I opened the mailbox. A letter was waiting. The usual crisp white envelope with the HOA logo embossed at the top. Notice of warning. Excess refuse. Attracts vermin. Dated that morning. Fine. 175 violation logged under aesthetic sanitation. I stared at it for a long time. They wanted me to feel unstable, like I was imagining things, overreacting. But the timeline was too clean. Security disabled. Trash. Staged. Citation filed within 8 hours. That's not coincidence. That's coordinated behavior. In the military, we called it soft targeting. You probe the perimeter. You test the sensors. You shake the cage, not to breach it, but to see if someone inside will flinch. They weren't trying to make me leave. They were trying to make me react. File the wrong complaint. Post the wrong accusation. Show aggression that could be framed. That was the trap, and I wasn't going to fall for it. I opened a fresh folder, labeled it Staging Events, Civil Retaliation, attached the citation, the photos, the deleted footage log, and a note to myself. This wasn't about trash. It was bait. And now we know it's a coordinated effort. I leaned back in my chair and looked across the room. Apollo was watching the window. Coda lay at the door, motionless but alert. They didn't move, didn't bark. But I could feel the shift. We weren't just in documentation mode anymore. We were preparing for the counterstrike, cliffhanger ending of Section 2. That night, while reviewing the backup feed, I paused on a frame that sent ice through my spine. A silhouette, half obscured, standing on the sidewalk at 1:56 a.m., the fake cop. He wasn't knocking, he was talking to Rachel Chen, on my side of the street. The day before her noise complaint was even sent, I didn't send an email. I sent a registered packet, hard copy, time-stamped, certified, addressed to the HOA president, CC'd to the board, and filed with the county clerk. Subject: cease and desist. Unlawful harassment and discriminatory enforcement basis. Fair Housing Act. Title 8. Section 818. Plus breach of contractual covenants. Arbor Hills HOA Bylaws 4.2, 6.7, 8.9. Inside, a letter drafted with surgical precision. I outlined every violation I had documented. Improper citations issued without inspection, deployment of unauthorized. Private security, selective enforcement of aesthetic guidelines, tampering with personal surveillance equipment, harassment following protected activities, e.g. flag display, service animals. Each claim was backed by time-stamped photographs, footage, and matching HOA policy clauses. The final paragraph read, "This is formal notice of your requirement to cease any and all actions constituting discrimination, targeted harassment, or unequal enforcement within 5 business days. Failure to comply will result in escalated civil remedies, including a request for court-ordered oversight and legal discovery of all HOA communications for the current fiscal year. No threats, no emotion, just consequences." I made 2 more moves that day. Neither of them loud, both of them devastating. First, I walked into the county enforcement office with a portable hard drive. At the front desk, I calmly requested a meeting with a public investigator. The woman behind the desk raised an eyebrow, but took one look at the envelope in my hand, stamped evidence submission, and buzzed me through. The investigator, a woman in her early 40s, listened quietly as I explained. A man impersonating a peace officer. A citation dated before the complaint existed. A home security system that was compromised, trash staged, followed by a same-day fine unreported payments tied to a board member's spouse. I let the evidence speak for itself. When I showed her the screenshot of the fake officer speaking with Rachel before the complaint was logged, she paused, then leaned forward. "You said you've already filed a cease and desist?" "Yes." "Good," she said. "Because this is a pattern." Her expression didn't change, but I could tell I wasn't the first one to walk into that office with a story like mine, but maybe I'd be the first with enough evidence to make it stick. That night, I made the third and final move. I opened an encrypted email thread marked CIV Legal, Priority, and typed a short message. Matt, I need a quiet favor. I've compiled a case file involving HOA misconduct, likely civil rights violations, and financial fraud. Could use your eyes on it. You still licensed in state? Maya Matt Logan. We served together for 2 years in Kandahar. He was JAG back then. Quiet, methodical, dangerous in a courtroom. Last I heard, he'd gone private, handling civil rights suits for veterans and small-town discrimination cases. The kind of lawyer who didn't advertise on buses. I attached a redacted version of the file, just enough to get his interest. He replied 3 hours later. Still licensed. Still dangerous. File looks solid. Give me 3 days. I'll call you. Not email. Assume comms monitored. M.I. stood at the window that night and looked out across the street. Rachel's house was dark, but the sensor light near her garage flicked on. Motion triggered. No one there, or someone wanted me to think no one was there. I didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, I whispered to myself, not to the dark, not to the enemy, but to the war I could feel unfolding. You tried to weaponize silence. Let me show you what it sounds like when the law speaks. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Arbor Hills Community Hall, a building designed to look welcoming, but wired for intimidation. Rows of plastic chairs, a dais, with microphones, a projector that rarely worked, a folding table up front where the board sat like royalty, and a single sign-in sheet for residents, as if names on paper somehow equaled inclusion. I arrived 15 minutes early, not to sit, to observe. Rachel Chen was already there, adjusting papers, smiling for no one in particular. Terry Alston arrived next, clutching a binder like it held actual power. A few other board members filtered in, the usual mix of passive and complicit. But the room wasn't empty like usual. This time, people came, not just the nosy or the bored. I counted 3 veterans, 1 couple from the South End, and Mr. Bennett seated near the back, his cane resting across his lap like a statement. They weren't holding signs. They didn't speak. But they were here, and I knew why. When the meeting opened, Rachel did her usual song and dance. Thank you all for attending. We'll begin with routine business. First item, security budget allocations for the upcoming quarter. I raised my hand. Calmly, silently, Rachel blinked. We'll get to homeowner comments after. Point of order, I said, not loudly, just clearly. This agenda was published with less than 48 hours' notice. That violates Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws. Under procedural rules, I'm permitted to request a freeze on any action until proper notice is issued. Murmurs behind me. Rachel faltered. That's not necessary. I kept my eyes on her. Then you'll allow residents to ask questions before the vote? Silence. Finally, she nodded. 1 minute, please. I stepped forward, papers in hand. I'd like to submit a correction for the record, I began. On April 3rd, a private security officer arrived at my home to conduct what he described as a noise investigation. No formal complaint had been filed, no vote was held, and the Community Safety Liaison Program funding was not disclosed in any previous agenda. I clicked the remote. Behind me, the projector screen flickered to life. On it, Rachel, speaking with the fake officer outside her home. Date stamped, time-coded, gasps. This footage was taken the night before the noise complaint was officially logged, I said. What you're seeing is a coordinated enforcement action initiated outside of protocol. Rachel's face drained. Before she could respond, I continued. I've also discovered that 2 landscaping contracts, both exceeding $20,000, were awarded to West Ridge Landscaping. The owner of that company is Gregory Chen, Rachel's husband. Neither contract was disclosed to homeowners. No open bid was held. A ripple moved through the room. I let the silence settle. Then Mr. Bennett stood up. No one called on him, no one asked, but he rose anyway. "I've lived here 16 years, he said. His voice was gravel and dignity. "When my wife put up her flag, they fined us, said it was non-conforming, but they let 3 others fly, without question." He turned to Rachel. "Now I know why." Rachel opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Then another voice. "I've been fined 11 times, said a man near the middle row. He pushed up slowly. I recognized him as the retired Marine who walked with braces. "For my wheelchair ramp. Said it didn't match the neighborhood slope. You said it was policy, but it was punishment." He looked at me. "She's not the problem. She's the only one telling the truth." Rachel scrambled. This is a hostile takeover attempt. These accusations are not official business." "They are now," I said calmly, "because the residents are the business. You work for us." Then I placed a thick envelope on the board's table. Inside, the full cease and desist, copies of contracts, vendor records, surveillance footage, affidavits from residents. "This is being submitted to the County Oversight Board," I said. "And a forensic audit has been requested." I turned to leave. No mic drop. No applause. But as I passed Mr. Bennett, he gave me a slow nod. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. "Keep going. Some of us just forgot what right looked like." The next morning, I woke to a neighborhood in transition. 3 emails from residents. 2 anonymous notes slipped under my door. 1 voicemail, shaky but clear. "I was on the board for 5 years. We were never told about those contracts. You're not alone. Keep going." By noon, a copy of the cease and desist was circulating. Rachel. Chen tried to downplay it in a private Facebook group, claimed I was escalating trivial matters, claimed the footage had been doctored, claimed I was trying to stir up panic. But the damage was done. The footage was time-stamped. The complaint log was public, and the Whisper Network had already turned into quiet conversations at kitchen tables. The board met again that week, unscheduled, emergency session, but this time it wasn't behind closed doors. Residents showed up, and they weren't there to listen. Rachel opened the meeting with her usual clipped tone. "We've called this session to clarify misinformation and reestablish order." But before she could continue, Terry Alston, her longtime yes man, spoke. His voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. "I wasn't told Greg Chen was receiving contracts," he said. "That should have gone through a vote. I didn't." "Sign off on that." Rachel turned sharply. "Terry," he didn't look at her. "I'm not taking a fall for something I didn't know about." The room stilled. Then Mr. Bennett stood again. No microphone, no permission, just presence. "You said we were paranoid," he said, addressing the entire board. "You said we were disruptive, but we weren't the ones writing checks to family members." He held up a printout. "The contract for West Ridge Landscaping. You tried to make us feel small, but you're the ones who should be ashamed." A soft murmur ran through the crowd. Then came another voice. "I was fined for letting my grandson's bike sit outside for one afternoon," said Mrs. Patel. "It was the only day he visited all summer. You fined me $250. Rachel tried again. "These aren't relevant to tonight's." Then someone raised a hand, not in anger, in quiet courage. It was Mr. Kwan, soft-spoken, never attended meetings before. "You fined me $400 for parking my daughter's car in our own driveway. She had just come home from chemo. You called it visual clutter." Gasps. Rachel looked. "Cornered now! This is turning into a circus!" she snapped. "This isn't protocol! This isn't—" "It is protocol," I said from the back. "It's called disclosure, and under HOA Regulation 9.6, every resident has a right to challenge board misuse, in person and on the record." Someone else spoke next. Then another. No yelling, no chaos. Just neighbors, remembering they had a voice. Rachel's eyes darted. From face to face, searching for backup, finding none. Even Terry had stopped looking at her. By the time the meeting ended, the board had adjourned for review. But the residents didn't leave. They lingered, spoke softly to each other in clusters, exchanged notes, phone numbers, and I knew the spell was broken. For years, the HOA had ruled by fear, fines, and fabricated rules. But now people were starting to ask questions. That night, a message appeared on the official Arbor Hills email thread. From Terry Alston. Subject, resignation from board. Effective immediately, I resign my position on the Arbor Hills HOA board. I was unaware of the full scope of financial dealings occurring without community oversight. I will fully cooperate with any investigation. I apologize to the residents I failed to protect. Attached to the message was a scan of 3 signed reimbursement forms, all tied to security-related discretionary funds. Each one had Rachel Chen's initials. By morning, the neighborhood looked different, not in structure, but in posture. People waved a little longer, spoke a little softer, watched a little less from behind curtains, and a little more out in the open. Something had shifted, not in the boardroom, but in the hearts of people who'd finally realized that silence hadn't protected them. It had only prolonged the damage. And now we were awake. The morning after Terry resigned, I drove downtown and filed the papers. 3 copies, all notarized. 1 for the county court, 1 for the state HOA oversight committee, and 1 for my attorney, Matt Logan, who'd flown in 2 days earlier and read the full case file over black coffee and silence. "You've got them cornered," he'd said. "Now we pin them down." The filing wasn't for revenge. It was for restraint. A motion for injunctive relief to immediately suspend the Arbor Hills HOA board's ability to issue citations, enforce fines, or initiate compliance actions, pending investigation into unethical practices, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and selective enforcement. In simple terms, a legal timeout, until a real authority could intervene. That same day, Matt submitted a formal complaint to the State Department of Housing and Community Affairs, naming Rachel Chen and unknown board associates in connection with retaliatory citation abuse, undisclosed vendor relationships, violation of open meeting laws, deployment of unauthorized private security personnel, targeted harassment under the Fair Housing Act. The complaint was 22 pages long. Evidence attached. 48 exhibits. The final page had 1 sentence in bold. "This HOA no longer serves its residents. It controls them through intimidation and deceit." 2 days later, Rachel received a subpoena, hand-delivered, signed by a district judge. Neighbors watched from their porches as she stood in her driveway, speechless, while the process server handed over the envelope and walked away. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just looked at the paper like it was written in a language she'd never studied, and never thought she'd need to. I saw it from across the street, didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood beside Apollo and Coda, who sat perfectly still at my feet, as if they too knew that order was finally arriving. That night, Matt and I held a quiet meeting at my house, invitation only. No signs, no grand declarations, just 12 neighbors sitting in my living room, drinking tea and passing manila folders. Each folder held their citation history, their photos, their stories. Mrs. Patel brought a binder with every fine she'd ever received. Mr. Kwan brought medical records and photos of the ramp the HOA had labeled visual clutter. Mr. Bennett brought his wife's flagpole citation and the receipt for the veteran's memorial wreath they'd forced him to remove. And I brought the law. We walked through every right they didn't know they had, every line the board had crossed, every form we were now filing as a group. 2 days later, a local journalist from the city's independent watchdog paper received an anonymous envelope. Inside, footage of Rachel and the fake officer contract records tied to her husband, evidence of meeting law violations, and a typed letter. In Arbor Hills, silence has been sold as safety. But the residents are starting to ask why the loudest people are always the ones holding the checkbook. The article dropped on a Monday. Headline, Whispers Behind the Gates, When the HOA Becomes the Problem. Subhead, Exclusive, Corruption, Conflicts, and a Community's Fight for Fairness in Arbor Hills. By noon, it was trending locally. By 3 p.m., the HOA's generic Gmail address had disabled replies. By nightfall, Terry Alston's resignation email had over 60 likes and 3 reposts with the words, "Thank you for finally saying something." I didn't post anything, didn't comment, didn't gloat. Instead, I added 2 final documents to the folder on my desk. One was a confirmation email from the state confirming a formal audit had been approved. The other was a copy of my injunction, now marked granted in the county clerk's system. I stared at the stamp for a long moment, not in triumph, but in clarity. This wasn't the end of the battle. It was the end of their unchecked control. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. I arrived 20 minutes early, not to prepare but to observe. The courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon floor cleaner, not justice, not ceremony, just another government building full of quiet. Systems waiting to be triggered. Rachel arrived with counsel, a young, overconfident man in a suit that cost more than my mortgage. She looked thinner, less polished. Her posture had changed. Gone was the HOA queen pin. In her place stood someone defensive, tense, uncertain of her footing. Matt stood beside me, gray suit, soft voice, steel beneath. He didn't posture. He just carried a slim folder and a mind full of facts. When our case was called, we stepped forward. The judge, late 50s pragmatic, glanced at the file. "This is a petition for injunctive relief against the Arbor Hills HOA, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Matt said. He gestured toward me. "This is Maya Trent, plaintiff and named party in all submitted evidence." The judge nodded. "Let's proceed." Rachel's attorney began with theatrics. "Your Honor, this entire proceeding is an overreaction. My client was simply enforcing community standards in a neighborhood governed by agreed-upon rules." He smiled too much. "She's attempting to bypass proper channels by weaponizing minor complaints. We argue this motion is frivolous, lacks legal merit, and is designed solely for attention." The judge didn't react. Matt didn't flinch. He opened the folder. "Your Honor," he said, "what we have is not an overreaction. It's a pattern." He passed up a series of documents, stapled, color-tabbed, and chronological. Violation notices with no photographic evidence. Meeting agendas, altered post-distribution footage showing HOA members violating procedural. Policy email records confirming premeditated targeting. Then came the core. Footage of the fake officer. Time-stamped images of citation manipulation. Contract awards with matching surnames and no competing bids. Matt's voice never rose. Plaintiff is a military widow, a former legal officer, and a documented service animal handler. She has received multiple citations that cannot be supported by any written HOA policy. He paused. These actions constitute retaliatory enforcement and discriminatory harassment, both of which are prohibited by the Fair Housing Act, Section 818, as well as state-level HOA regulatory law. He looked the judge in the eye. "Every one of our claims is evidence-backed. Every violation is documented." The judge turned to Rachel's attorney. "Do you dispute the authenticity of these exhibits?" He hesitated. "I haven't had time to review every detail." "They've been available for 72 hours. The judge interrupted. "Have you reviewed the video showing your client coordinating with an unlicensed officer prior to the complaint?" I can't confirm that timing, Your Honor." The judge leaned back. Then he turned to me. "Miss Trent," he said, "what remedy are you seeking today?" I spoke clearly, steadily. "An injunction to halt any enforcement actions by the Arbor Hills HOA. A freeze on citation issuance, financial penalties, and procedural changes until a full audit can be conducted. I paused. And a mandate for public disclosure of all vendor contracts and meeting records for the past 2 years. The judge studied me, then looked to the courtroom, a few rows of silent residents behind us. Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Patel, Mr. Kwan, a young mother who had never spoken at a board meeting but who had emailed me that morning to say, "Thank you for not backing down." He nodded once. "Motion granted," he said. "The HOA will issue no new fines, penalties, or notices pending state audit. All resident complaints will be reviewed by the Oversight Committee, and this court recommends full transparency moving forward." Rachel's attorney opened his mouth and then closed it. The judge turned back to me. "Miss Trent, thank you for reminding this court what civic accountability looks like." I nodded, said nothing, but behind me I heard a quiet exhale from Mr. Bennett. Outside the courthouse, Rachel didn't look at me. She just stood near her attorney, whispering with narrowed eyes. But as I stepped out onto the sidewalk, Terry Alston was waiting. He extended his hand. "You did what none of us had the guts to do." "I did what the law allows," I said. "No," he replied. "You did what decency demands. It didn't happen all at once. Power never collapses like a tower. It crumbles like sand. Slowly, then all at once. The injunction went into effect on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the state auditor began reviewing financial records from the past 3 years. A forensic team uncovered over $71,000 in undocumented reimbursements tied to vendor flexibility, security discretion, and community improvement waivers, none of which were legal under the HOA's charter. At least half of. Those payments were signed off by Rachel Chen. The other half couldn't be verified at all. That meant one thing: forged approvals. And the moment that audit landed, the HOA's liability insurance pulled coverage. Their legal fund? Frozen. The board collapsed from the inside. Rachel was officially removed from the board within 8 days of the injunction. No resignation, no apology. Just a note posted on the HOA portal at 1:14 a.m. that read, "Due to unforeseen personal obligations, I will no longer be able to serve in my current capacity." A formality. 2 weeks later, a civil lawsuit was filed against her by multiple residents, spearheaded by Mr. Kwan, Mrs. Patel, and 3 others who had never spoken before the meetings began. Rachel's husband's company was banned from receiving future HOA contracts, and new voting rules were enacted. Open bidding, public financials, meeting recordings uploaded within 48 hours, Bylaw 9.6 rewritten and approved, in public. The first election for the new board was held 6 weeks after the injunction. I didn't campaign, but I didn't have to. I was voted in unanimously, along with Mr. Bennett and Mrs. Patel. Our first act? We repealed every pending fine issued in the last 18 months, cleared every balance, apologized, in writing, to every resident who had been harassed, cornered, or silenced under the old board's reign. Then we launched something Arbor Hills had never seen before, a community bill of rights. Residents had the right to question, to film, to request records without retaliation, to speak at meetings without fear. The neighborhood changed in ways too subtle for headlines. Flags reappeared. Not political, not performative, just personal. The elderly couple who once kept to themselves now hosted weekend chess matches in their driveway. Kids played soccer in yards where balls had once been banned. Sidewalk gardens popped up. Non-compliant foliage, the old board had called them. Now they were flowers. No citations, just color. One morning, about 2 months after the hearing, I stepped out with Apollo and Coda for their morning walk. They still paused at intersections, still checked the perimeter. Combat habits don't die easily, in dogs or people. We walked past Mr. Kwan's house. His ramp had been professionally rebuilt, painted to match the house, with new lighting along the sides. His granddaughter waved from the porch. "Thank you," she called. I nodded, smiled. Didn't need words. A few weeks later, a package arrived on my doorstep. No name, no return address. Inside, a photo frame, black wood. In it, a still image taken from the courtroom. Me standing at the bench, Apollo at my side, Coda just behind me. Clipped to the back was a note. You reminded us. We weren't crazy. We were just quiet. And you taught us what happens when quiet doesn't mean passive anymore. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Not for me. Because peace doesn't come just from removing the threat. It comes from facing what the threat tried to erase. I took a trip the following month, 3 hours north. Quiet, winding roads, no freeway exits, no signs. Just a small cemetery on a hill where grass grew a little too long and the wind always seemed to blow from the west. Tyler's grave was there, military marker, polished stone. I sat down on the bench we'd installed 2 summers ago. Coda lay beside me. Apollo watched the trees, no barking, no sound, just presence. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small box, matte black, velvet lined. Inside was my badge from the newly formed Resident Oversight Committee, a role I'd been appointed to by County Council after the Arbor Hills. Case was featured in the State Housing Accountability Bulletin. They asked me to advise other neighborhoods, to train board members, draft protections, teach people how to fight smart, not loud. Tyler would have loved that. He always said quiet power was the most dangerous kind. I placed the badge next to his stone, let it rest there for a moment, then whispered, I didn't. Raise my voice, Ty. I raised the law. I left the badge with him, then stood and walked back to the car. Before we left, I looked down at my dogs. Coda looked up. Apollo wagged once. And I knew. We weren't guards anymore. We were home. The first time the HOA sent someone to threaten me, I didn't call a lawyer. I whistled. And justice answered, not with fury but with truth.